Well, I'm shifting it toward next season. I don't know if we're going to see him right away next season. I think eventually, if he gets his life in line, obviously he'll get another opportunity. But now with the Cowboys kind of pretty much earmarking that they're not interested, all of a sudden the possibilities for Johnny Manziel are drying up. And then when you have his own father coming out saying things like he's concerned he's not going to be alive at 24, that kind of signals there's much more going on than just football. And he first needs to clean up his life before he can get back to the NFL.
No question about it. And, there's a lot. Jimmy Haslam is the owner of the Browns. Said they've reached out to him numerous times without a response. He said, quote, "We're not worried about Johnny, the football player. We're worried about Johnny Manziel, the person." His agent turned his back on him. It's unfortunate for him. But we'll see. I guess the Johnny Manziel story is not going to end on a great note.
No, there's an old adage that says help isn't for those who need it; it's for those who want it. And to this point, Johnny Manziel hasn't wanted it. Plenty of people have reached out from the Cleveland Browns, certainly, and he was in rehab once, to his family, who you can say whatever you want about them because they've taken some hits in this too because they're well off, and there's talk about entitlement and things like that. But he tried to get him into rehab. And you mentioned his agent. His agent, let him go as a client to give him a wake-up call. He wants to help him as a human being, as an individual. And to this point, he hasn't accepted any of these avenues, and that sets off some dangerous bells at some point. And it's a realization that he's going to have to come to himself before he can actually be helped.
John, Roger Goodell today, the State of the NFL address. How did you feel that he did? What were some of the major topics? We aired the first 20 minutes or so. From what I heard, some of the things that we heard, I didn't hear all of it, but some of the things that I heard was Monday night game in Mexico City, the possibility of a UK team and expanding into the UK at some point, that's all sold out. Ticket sales very good there. The female Rooney Rule. What are some of the things that stood out to you, and how do you think he did today?
Well, I think Roger himself needs some help and some other issues. Namely, when he goes through these exercises, he's not very good at handling the difficult questions. You mentioned some of the stuff that's important to the league and how they do business, but ancillary. But when you talk about really, really serious discussions like CTE, he just sticks his foot in the mouth. And today it was the couch quote, and it says something to the effect of there's risk in life, there's risk on sitting on a couch. And that just comes off awful to the general public. And he's not good in those types of situations. And there's the famous quote from Joe Maroon. It's famous now. He's the medical director of the NFL, who talked about youth football being less dangerous than, say, riding a bike or riding a skateboard. And people have run with that for years. They're going to do the same thing with this quote today, the couch quote from Roger Goodell. And it's in those types of extraneous circumstances where he's just really, really bad at it. And it's not getting any better because he's been doing it for a long time, and he's not able to deflect these questions, some of which are completely unfair, to be honest, but he just doesn't handle them well.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, Super Bowl Sunday is this Sunday. John, an overview on this game, I think that hasn't been mentioned much, is the number one offense against the number one scoring offense against the number one scoring defense in the league. It seems that that is not a major backdrop of this game. It seems like it's somewhere in the distance. So why are people not talking about that dynamic more?
Well, I think people have. I think when you get into the 2-week period in between the championship games and the Super Bowl, you tend to get into all those other issues from, it started with race and Cam Newton, and it's gone on to other things. And Then you have all the off-the-field issues. You have a practice squad player getting sent back after getting in trouble. You have a player whose father died. So I think when people get back to the game, they start talking about things like that. They certainly should, because you're right. You have the number one scoring offense against the number one defense in the NFL, and I think, Carolina's favorite in this game. They should be favorite. But if the Broncos are going to pull off the upset, it's going to be with that defense on that side sort of leading things. So people should be paying attention to the fact that they're the best defense in the entire league.
How about the Ron Rivera story? A couple of years ago, this guy, it sounded like he was on the hot seat, right? And then they were 3-8-1. The next thing you know, they won 4 straight in December. They win the division. They go to the playoff. They even won a game at 7-8-1. And now they are on the brink of winning the Super Bowl and going 18-1. Does that tell us a lesson, though, about what happened in Philadelphia at all?
Well, it tells you something about continuity, and that's the way to go in the NFL. But it's only the way to go if you have a guy there. I think you go back a year. You mentioned the run last season when the Panthers won 4 straight. If you go back to the year before that, that's when Dave Gettleman, the GM, came in. And remember, Ron Rivera had already been there for 2 years. So if you think about the way NFL teams normally do business, a new GM comes in, he's not going to want to keep a coach who has been mediocre to that point. But Gettleman, instead of just working everything for his ego, took a look at what he had and realized, hey, we have Cam Newton, we have Luke Kuechly, we have Thomas Davis. We got to build up around that. I think I have a good head coach. So I think he sort of put the ego off to the side and said, I can work with this guy, and it's better. And he mentioned it this week. He said, if you hire a new coach, you're basically setting yourself back 6 months. Unfortunately, the Eagles are going to have to deal with it. But in their situation, they looked at the head coach, and they gave him an opportunity, but they didn't feel like they could work with him. So I think that's the difference between the two scenarios.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. The Super Bowl is coming up. We'll get John's pick on it and key to the game in just a minute here. And, we talked about Goodell, in his press conference, kind of State of the Union, State of the NFL today. How about your thoughts when you take a look at this, John, and, this could be Peyton Manning's last ride here, his last game. Is this an important game for his legacy?
I think to a lot of people it is, and I think to the casual fan it's very, very important because there is that narrative that he has often come up short on the big stage. I think to hardcore football people understand how consistent he's been over his career. I don't think the difference from being 2-2 in the Super Bowl versus 1-3 means all that much. He's one of the all-time greats. He will be win or lose after Sunday's game, but certainly to a group, it means a lot. And to get that win, even though it's really, whether he wins on Sunday or loses, Mike, the bottom line is he hasn't played well this season, and he's on the last legs of his career. So what happens against the Panthers really doesn't define what he was at the apex of his career when he was the best quarterback who ever lived. So that's kind of, looking at your question and maybe putting it off a little bit, but it's the truth. The reality is to some people it means everything, and to the people who really understand football, it doesn't mean all that much.
Give me your thoughts on the investigation then from the Peyton Manning side that got out there, the investigative, them trying to look some things into the Al Jazeera documentary.
Well, it was a Washington Post story from Will Hobson. He's a guy who I used to work with, so he's a tremendous investigative reporter. He won a Pulitzer Prize in Tampa, and he did a great job in that story. And I think a lot of people who looked at it sort of took the headline out and looked at the wrong part of it, in the fact that there was a 911 call, and that was sort of splashy news. But the real news was the Washington Post confirmed that Ashley Manning, Peyton's wife, did indeed get a package of medicine from the Geyer Clinic. And that's the interesting part. There's smoke to this story. There's no question about it. And, one of the reasons, besides the fact that there's not going to be a lot of places for Peyton Manning to play next season, he might want to retire and walk away, is to try to make this story go away. Because you can take HGH for certain health reasons, but they're very few and far between. And generally, you're not going to be prescribed it from an anti-aging clinic. So that begs some serious questions that he might have to answer. Certainly, it would be more under the microscope if he returned next season.
John, give me your pick. Who wins and why? Super Bowl 50.
Well, I think the Panthers win the game because they're the best team. As you mentioned, 17-1. I think Cam Newton's probably the most unique player we've ever seen at the quarterback position. And that dual threat is just too difficult to deal with. And I think at this stage of his career, Peyton Manning just can't keep up offensively with what Carolina will be able to do. And I don't think they're going to go nuts against that great defense, but I think they'll get 23 or 24 points, and I think you'll see sort of a 24-13 type of game.
All right, John McMullen has more on the Eagles and the NFL, of course, over at 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. On the eve, of course, for us for Super Sunday. We know it is 2 days away, but this is our final show. Before there, John goes Carolina over Denver. I'll have my pick coming up in about an hour. Thanks, John. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Mike.